anybody who's in the room who's not Jamaican, in the US you have Kool-Aid, in Jamaica we have Quenchade, and that's the explanation I'll start. Alright, so the title of this piece is My Mother and Myself. When I was little, I used to drink Quenchade, which was the then only, and now, best known soft drink mix available in Jamaica. What I remember about Quenchade now are two things. First of all, my father used to raise chickens. He never sold them or raised that many of them for consumption. He just kept a few around the yard so that we could have our own eggs. I used to like watching the chickens. When I was little, I was fascinated by their every action. There was this one baby chick that was born with crippled wings and one crippled leg. Of course, it couldn't walk and keep up with the others, so I kept it in the house as a pet, feeding it every day and constantly running my fingers over its soft yellow feathers. My baby chick died after a few weeks, but thereafter, I maintained a love of bird feathers. I used to walk around the yard and pick up loose chicken feathers that had fallen off our birds. Growing up as an only child, my child's play involved acting out various stories I had created in my head with dolls or by myself, which is true. I used to pretend that I was one of the colonial aristocrats I saw pictures of in my mother's old history books, and that chicken feathers were my feather quills. Pastes of different colors of Quenchade and water were my ink. I also recall that they used to have a sweepstakes contest which ran on the radio called Quenchade Guess the Riddle. I can't exactly recall now what the prizes were, but I think that there was always some cash to be won. That aside, I clearly recall afternoons after school spent in anticipation by the radio at precisely the same time every afternoon, waiting for the 5-minute segment to come on wherein the announcers would draw the letters sent in from all over the country. It was simple really. Every month, they would read a new riddle on the show and invite entries from all over by mail. Of course, each entry had to include at least 2 packets of Quenchade to qualify. One had to include a letter addressed to the announcer stating what he or she believed to be the answer to the riddle, and the letter with the correct answer was drawn and read on air. The sender would then win a prize. If at the end of the segment they hadn't found a winner, they'd give a clue and sign off until the following day. I remember there being other side prizes too, like Parish of the Day. The first letter read on air from the chosen parish would win its sender a prize. There was also a prize for the letter containing the most Quenchade packets of the day. My mother and I weren't concerned about the latter prize. We were just more concerned that each of our entries contained the minimum required packets, that we sent a large enough number of letters to increase our chances of winning, and of course that we had the correct answer, which we always did. We always knew the right answer but never won. I remember spending many hours with my mother helping her write multiple entries for which my handwriting had to be impeccable. You can't write to the radio station with that untidy scrawl of yours. The people need to read what you're writing clearly. Plus, if we win, they'll want us to come down to the radio station. Can you imagine these important people looking at this bright little girl who got the answer right with a crab toe writing? I was always crushed when a winner was announced and it wasn't us. My mother simply listened out for the next riddle, then promptly went on to prepare more writing paper, envelopes, and stamps than we had used for the previous one. She reasoned that if we continued entering with the right answer, we were bound to win one day. I used to enjoy certain little activities with my mom. Stuffing envelopes for the Guess the Riddle contest, reading her old high school literature books. I discovered V.S. Reid the summer I turned 9. Lying in bed during the holidays and listening to radio talk shows for hours and then just talking about things I had learned at school. This continued until I turned 13. Got my first serious crush and became the self-centered pubescent creature which my mother referred to as neither fish nor fowl. During my 13th year, I distanced myself from my mother, my friends, popular music, and an irrational love of pretty stationery engulfed my world. I started seeing time spent with my mother as a burden. Her insistence on entering things like the Guess a Riddle and writing contests exhausting. Her tendency to hold on to old things like my first school notebook as incomprehensibly crazy. And for the first and only time in my life, during a heated argument over breaking curfew, I told my mother that I hated her. As hard as I pushed, my mother pushed harder. She pushed me to the top 1% of my graduating class, pushed me into entering writing contests, community service, tennis, and all the other things she never had the chance to do when she was growing up. The harder I pushed, the more she insisted, and soon I came to realize that she was not, in fact, the weird hoarder of things who was intent on ruining my social life. By the time I passed my O-levels, my mother became more than the bigger, older person who ran my life. In my eyes, she became a person. The lesson here is simple. My mother is no stranger to disappointment. My mother, who, as an elementary school student, made it only as far as the parish finals for the spelling bee. My mother, who, as a high school graduate with no money for university or teacher's college, joined the National Youth Service and became a teacher that way, only to have her sense of purpose trampled upon when the subsequent government dismantled the NYS program. My mother, who left my abusive father to move the both of us and all of our possessions into the tiny back room of her grandmother's house where we lived together for 8 years, never allowed me to be a mediocre student, never allowed excuses for anything less than 90% on a math test, stayed up with me until 2 or 3 a.m. in our family's cramped dining room, surrounded by dusty barrels of foodstuff sent by relatives abroad, and jumping out of our skins at the sounds of croaking lizards while I worked on school projects, never allowed me to quit or even utter the word can't. Of course, all the people I know personally, no one has had a harder life than my mother. But she has never ceased to have hope. She's now pouring the last of her hope, meager wages from her current job, and my meager monthly remittances into her one last big dream, building a house of her own. I know it is corny and out of fashion nowadays to say that we should never give up and other platitudes, but whenever I feel the paralyzing pull of fear, all I need to do is remember sitting at the Formica dining table with piles of envelopes and quenche packets, pen in hand, hoping to win one day. Thank you.
Quenche Guess the Riddle Contest.